So, welcome everybody. Today I have Bob Pulver with me, and Bob is the host of Elevate Your AIQ, a podcast and Substack, a newsletter aimed at demystifying artificial intelligence and preparing professionals for rapidly evolving landscape of work. He has a rich career that includes leading internal startups and innovation at IBM, and he blends deep enterprise expertise with a passion for responsible AI innovation, ethical frameworks, and talent transformation. Bob now advises organizations and professionals on how to leverage AI tools for real world outcomes and always grounded in strategic thinking and human centered principles. And Bob, I was looking through your LinkedIn profile before this, and I think one of the trends that I see, as a recruiter, I'm always looking at LinkedIn profiles and looking at resumes, and I'm always trying to tease out sort of the patterns. And I think one of the patterns that I teased out or was obvious to me was just your experience with helping companies sort of um, navigate and sort of leverage new technologies and innovation. And so we were at a time right now where things are moving really fast. And I'm really curious to dive into this with you in terms of how you help companies navigate just this ever-changing landscape. So with that, Bob, welcome. Glad to have you here today.
Thanks so much, Eric. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited for this conversation. Yeah, that was a very good intro. I don't know how much more I can add to that, but certainly um, 25 years of enterprise experience I felt was enough. And so, yeah, going off on my own, I just saw opportunities to leverage all the diverse roles that I've had across those enterprises because I've certainly done a lot of different things in my IBM career and then at NBC Universal. And so I think a lot of that comes into play if being a generalist can be a strength, it's because it's, the exposure to all of these different areas and be able to connect, dots that others may not see if they had more of a linear, career path. And I think that'll play into some of the discussion that we have as people try to navigate their careers these days and figure out, well, how do I
Yeah.
have confidence not only that I'll be the right fit and I've got the potential to succeed at a particular organization, but will I have the tenure that I want, and can I have control over my own destiny, if you will, as I try to navigate this? Because it probably, even if it was a linear path to this point, I wouldn't count on that being the trajectory, going forward, just because there's so much in flux. But we'll dig into
Yeah.
that, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, this whole idea of moving from having the market value generalists versus specialists, I mean, I think that's an evolution that we're seeing in real time here. And I'd love to touch on that. But before we do, I want to talk a little bit about what is responsible AI? What does that mean? And maybe you can give some background on that.
Yeah. So I think for a long time, people have thought about using technology responsibly, but when it comes to AI, there's just specific elements that make up what people consider responsible AI from a market standpoint. And I think some of that is grounded in some of the fundamentals that people are familiar with in terms of data privacy and cybersecurity. So those are elements of this, but it goes a lot further when it comes to AI in terms of how people are using and have built algorithms and autonomous systems and AI, particularly when it comes to talent and how it's used in assessing talent or making decisions about a job candidate, which I'm sure your audience can relate
Yeah.
to. But it's really about, can you explain how it works, right? You don't have to give away your intellectual property per se, but you've got to understand the logic behind it. Like, how is it coming to these conclusions to generate these scores, or whatever the output format is? But how did it derive that, and was it done in a bias mitigating way? We can't necessarily eliminate all bias, but we know from the source of the data that's training these algorithms that the data quality and the veracity of that data. So do we trust this data? Did it come from a trusted source? Has it been cleansed? Has it been
Yeah.
validated, et cetera? That is the fuel for these algorithms. So when AI is exhibiting a bias, it's not the AI that's biased. It's just a mirror of you are what you eat, I guess, right?
Yeah.
The data, all the data that's been ingested, the AI is only drawing conclusions and identifying patterns in data that it's ingested. So that's why it's important to have good data hygiene as you go in and build some of these AI systems. And I think a lot of organizations may be so anxious to jump on this AI sort of bandwagon and not fall behind, you could inadvertently neglect some of those fundamentals. So I think those are important. But responsible AI is privacy, it is cybersecurity, but it's the explainability, the transparency of the builder of the models. Can we see sort of under the hood to a degree and see exactly how this was constructed? So yeah, so explainability, transparency. There's got to be trust, baked into there. So some people use the term trustworthy AI, but I think that's just a part of it. And ethics is another big part of being responsible. So are we building these models such that we're giving everyone the same opportunity, that there's fairness sort of baked into that? So it's really an amalgamation of all of these, sort of core principles that keep us all safe, that ensure people are treated fairly, so that we are confident that as this model continues to learn, it's also going through some steps to make sure that it is not just, you're not just checking a bunch of boxes at a point in
Yeah.
time, that you're continuously sort of monitoring this either through periodic checks or ideally through some form of continuous monitoring, just like we're always monitoring for privacy, data leaks or cybersecurity
Yeah.
threats and things like that. So I think this is just another layer on top of those continuous monitoring frameworks.
Yeah. It just feels like there's a little bit of a tension between, um, if I'm a leader at a small company and I'm eager to learn more about AI and how it might be integrated into our operations and all that. It feels like there's a bit of a tension in terms of wanting to play with the technology in a way that is sort of experimental. Let's see what it can do. And it feels like on the other side, it's like, okay, well, we do need to be able to do this in a way that is measured, that is responsible, that the board used earlier is explainable, right? And not just taking it for what it spits out and sort of taking action on that indiscriminately, right? There has to be some discernment about the quality of what it's producing, and how it's being produced. And so it feels like there's a bit of a learning curve there. And it feels like that's where you come into play in terms of helping companies to navigate that.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's around building that awareness. For anyone who's not deep into either governance or ethics or privacy, any of those individual sort of domains, even before AI, right? Like those things, those concepts existed, but the AI layer and having all these combined into one platform and a set of capabilities, sort of elevates the risk, right? Especially as we move towards, large deployments of AI agents and what's
Yeah.
referred to as agentic AI or agentic workflows. As it becomes easier to connect some of these different systems and AI starts, being passed in some ways almost autonomously, from agent to agent in different domains within, normal data restrictions across, departments and things like that.
Yeah.
But you've got to think about all these things all at once now. And I think the average employee, it doesn't really matter what domain you're in outside of those sort of oversight areas. But if you're just an average, recruiter or, supply chain analyst or whatever, like you're not actually thinking about those things, which is also why I think it's better to just have continuous monitoring, because you're going to mitigate risk and mitigate the likelihood that someone is inadvertently, the weak link, just like anybody can click on a phishing, email and create, this exposure. So part of it is everyone having, I like to say everyone is responsible for responsible AI, but, to varying degrees, right? I think everyone should avoid, again, clicking on whatever the AI equivalent is of clicking on that phishing email. But, for example, not uploading personal or proprietary information to a public AI assistant, right? Might be something like, oh, I've got a deadline. I've got to get this done. So-and-so is my contact into this other system. I don't have access to that. Well, I'm just gonna take my chances, roll the dice
Yeah.
a bit, and upload this information, and just hope that it doesn't fall into the wrong hands or get trained the mothership at OpenAI or some other vendor. And so I think everyone just needs to be aware of what some of those risks are. But it's also incumbent upon application owners and people evaluating new technology vendors to start asking better questions and augmenting your own RFI and RFP process as you go and evaluate these different vendors, but hold them to a higher standard. I feel like the level of trust and expectation has been elevated. So everyone needs to be evaluated on a new set of criteria. And even your incumbent vendors should perhaps be reevaluated to make sure that we're not putting too much trust in them, because this is all new capabilities to everyone,
Yeah.
even software vendors, software providers, adding maybe adding AI capabilities to their tools. Well, how do I know that your developers who built the core platform were also trained on AI ethics and are being responsible by design as they build some of these new capabilities? So there's a just like any new emerging technology area, especially with one with such high growth potential and opportunity for revenue growth, you still want to make sure that people um, are thinking about these things and not just sort of in this mode where they're just anxious to get something to market, be the first to market or early to market,
Yeah.
and just riding that wave. Because if you're not being responsible by design, someone's going to find that out pretty quickly, and then it's all going to backfire. So I just think everyone needs to pay attention to these sort of core principles, and if you can bake them in to how you're building things. I say that from a vendor perspective, but if you think about it, we can all build applications now. We can all
Hmm.
go in and vibe code and build these applications, whether it's with Amazon Party Rock, or build a custom GPT in ChatGPT, or um, there's projects and all kinds of other things you can do with Anthropic's assistant, and obviously Google Gemini. I'm a Google Workspace user, so I've been playing around with Gemini myself. So
Yeah.
there's a lot out there, but we just can't be blinded by the shiny objects.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot out there that people can get really excited about, and I think what you're speaking to is having some guardrails in place, right? Like, those folks that don't know anything about phishing emails and having some education around what a phishing email is, as an example, right? I think the sort of the same equivalent exists on the AI side. You mentioned privacy, right? And with yeah, I think most of our audience here has worked with ChatGPT, and it can be very enticing to provide it with more context, because the more context, the more nuanced of a response it can give you. And so it could be very enticing to upload all kinds of information about yourself that might. And so I think it sounds like part of what you're advocating for is just some awareness of things like privacy and how that information that you're providing can potentially be used by the mothership, as you say. And
Yeah.
so, that kind of education, it seems like it's really important. What other sort of guidelines around ethics and responsible use would you, would you share with our audience, aside from privacy?
Well, I think as we think about just, I guess, a talent example would be, what types of questions are you asking, and what information are you giving one of these assistants so that you can get a better answer? So some of that, I think, even as an extension of your own private data, being respectful of other people's private data and the sensitivity to that, right? So I use recruiter. I always pick on recruiters. Sorry, recruiters. But you may upload some information about you, and that's your prerogative in a personal setting. But if you were to just use the public chat GPT to like evaluate resumes or something like that, or tell me what you see the big differences are between these two. I've got deciding between these two candidates, and you just upload resumes seemingly innocently. I mean, I think you've got to respect the privacy of all the data that's at your
Yeah.
fingertips, right? And so I'm sure all recruiters go through some sensitivity training around that data privacy, and but that there's legal ramifications to that. So I think you've got to think about that. But I think some people may overshare, just like they do in social media. Some
Yeah.
people overshare when they post stuff online. I'm sure there's going to be some kids that are very unhappy that their parents uploaded information about them, embarrassing information about them when they were kids. Hopefully, they'll get over that. I think there's all kinds of situations where you've got to think about the other party, or a potential. Put yourself in the shoes of someone else and try to anticipate how some information could be misused. Not just think about, well, I'm using it for this purpose and it's innocuous for anyone else to do anything with it. But that's not necessarily true, especially if you can either aggregate information, or you could use that information to hold it against someone and some kind of scheme. I mean, I've definitely gotten some
Yeah.
really threatening emails before claiming to be, tracking me and what have you. So I just think there's still a lot of aspects um, that we need to pay close attention to. There's a lot of, in addition to what's going on in the market with like talent acquisition technologies and employee engagement tools, and AI is used, throughout the talent lifecycle, as you know, Eric. But I think that when it comes to just everyday things, I just think people need to think twice before they enter information or provide information into some of these tools. It can be helpful, of course, but there are definite negative repercussions if you're not thinking more broadly about the implications. And honestly, I think that goes to some of the skills I know we want to talk about, but just applying critical thinking.
Yeah.
Like, is there an alternative way to derive insights from this data? Is there another way to go about this? I think AI is often going to be looked at as a sort of shortcut. And I just think people need to think critically about, you know, what else could go wrong, which is why I always advocate for organizations to have like a governance committee and an ethics committee that really aggregates the cognitive diversity of the organization to say, these are appropriate uses of AI within an enterprise context. And you basically get these things vetted before investments are made that, this is an appropriate use. And there's a lot of art to come with it, but let's make sure we proceed
Yeah.
with caution. It's almost like enabling everybody to do a little red teaming to see like what could go wrong, and let's evaluate these solutions thoroughly, and let's make sure these are the appropriate use cases.
Yeah, you mentioned that little use case of a recruiter uploading somebody's resume or to ChatGPT, and it could be completely innocent and sort of innocuous. And there's a lot of recruiters out there that don't work for organizations that have this kind of training or oversight or controls, and the organization they may be working for may not even endorse using AI, right? But then the recruiter may be using it in a way that they think is innocent or harmless. And so I guess maybe my question, even for me, is just, what are some of the consequences of using it in sort of indiscriminate ways where you're uploading maybe other people's information or even your own information sort of indiscriminately? What are the consequences of that? And what are some of the workarounds, right? Is there an
Yeah.
incognito mode or are there certain modes or certain tools that you could use that would help mitigate some of those consequences?
Yeah, there's a couple things at play because first, if you're in an organization, you should be using approved solutions, right? Meaning it's some sort of private instance. The data doesn't leave your infrastructure. Doesn't go outside the firewall. You've got and so you've got to work with HR's got to work with the IT team to make sure that environment is established. Certainly, you've got to recognize that the candidates who submitted their resumes gave it to you with the intent that this is for evaluating this person for this job or perhaps for future jobs. I think you check that box as a candidate as you go through that process. It says, we're going to store your information for these purposes. No point in that process does it say, oh, by the way, we may also just throw it up in ChatGPT and just see what it thinks about you, right?
Yeah.
So I think you've got to be careful that this is, yes, it's their resume. Yes, their resume is probably floating around in a million places. Yes, they probably also have, or they may also have a LinkedIn profile that's public. But that doesn't mean it's up to you, Mr. Recruiter, to just, pile onto that and exacerbate the potential exposure of that information. So candidate fraud is a big issue right now. So misrepresenting yourself, maybe you're not a real person, maybe you're based in a country that's been embargoed by the U.S., and maybe you're not a friend to, obviously a U.S. based guy here, so U.S. sort of centric lens, but there are bad actors out there all over the place, and one of the ways in which they're trying to get inside an organization is to literally go through the talent acquisition process using AI with fake profiles and things like that.
Yeah.
So candidate resume could wind up in the hands of where it's not supposed to be, and it wasn't your legal authority to share it. I think the other big thing is, again, this kind of goes back to basic, AI literacy, but you really should not be using like an LLM model to evaluate candidates because, I mean, you could try it if you were inside an organization where you had a lot of tight, controls, and you were able to monitor it for explainability and transparency and consistency. One of the
Yeah.
challenges with trying to use ChatGPT, like, let's just play this out. I mean, legal issues and privacy issues aside, if a team of recruiters were all using public ChatGPT, evaluating different candidates for different roles or whatever, you would not have any consistency in the way you are evaluating candidates because it's not a model that's custom trained to, the job rec that you posted and the organizational, uh, you know, culture, strategy, all of these things that would factor into whether this person is, an ideal fit with the potential to succeed in this role. So there's a whole issue with the lack of consistency and therefore scalability if everyone is kind of going off just using their own, co-pilot or their own public,
Yeah.
using the public system. And so there have been studies that have proven that to be true. So if you think about algorithms in talent acquisition in general, it far predates, LLMs and generative AI, right? I mean, we're just talking about old school, predictive
Yeah.
AI and machine learning. So all the systems that come up with like, stack ranking and or grading or scoring of a resume, which a lot of them do, the applicant tracking systems do, those were there. Many of those were there way before generative AI. They were using much more, mathematical, logic and reasoning that built those algorithms. And so this is definitely not just purely a new, LLM kind of phenomenon. But I just think people need to take great care as they go through this. I mean, yes, it can help you go through the deluge of resumes that you're getting, right? Probably getting, in some cases, 10x
Yeah.
the application volume that you used to get. There's no recruiter or team of recruiters that can possibly go through every single resume. So you need technology to help you, and you have for quite a while. But this ultimate decision is still up to that human who is, weighing all the evidence and still applying their own, instinct and oversight over what these solutions are telling you. So if you just use it as if you take it at face value, and you're basically letting the algorithm make the decision, which we don't want to see, and
Yeah.
that would be problematic.
Yeah, you mentioned machine learning and some of those other sort of predictive algorithms of years past. In the past, those technologies were not as easily accessible to a non-technical or lay person. They had to be implemented through some sort of application that is easy to use. But now you have this power of this LLM that's accessible by anybody that could speak or anybody that could type, right? Any lay person. And it seems it's so enticing to almost think that these responses are just, they're just, I don't know how to say it, that they're just worth acting on without any second thought. And I think to your point, a little bit of education will go a long way in terms of what are some of the limitations behind that response. Like, well, how are these responses being formulated? And you can't just take everything at face value. I think that's what you're saying, right, Bob?
Yeah, I think the tricky part about some of these AI solutions is they'll give you a response that sounds really good,
Yeah.
but under more scrutiny, they start to fall apart in a lot of cases. And so we've seen this on the talent acquisition side, in various parts of the talent acquisition side. So anytime it's, maybe there's an AI tool that's summarizing an interview or that's summarizing a
Yeah.
resume or all these summarization tools could overlook some context, or they may give you a perspective that's slightly biased because, in its training set, it, found patterns that aren't necessarily aligned to, bias mitigation, techniques, or it hasn't been, evaluated thoroughly enough before deploying or whatever it is. I mean, it's hard, right? There's there's so many use cases to use some of these AI assistants for without even getting into, the agents
Yeah.
and other capabilities, but there's a lot. And that's why I think the more and the earlier you start talking to people about responsible AI and AI ethics and governance and all of these things, like, we're not expecting everyone to be experts in all of these different domains, but you need to recognize that there are some limitations to these systems, and they're not perfect. I mean, if you compare marketing statements from some of these solutions versus, academic studies and research that have evaluated different AI assistants and LLMs, the difference is pretty stark, right? Like the academics are going really deep into how these tools were designed, and they're using synthetic data or some standardized, data set that's been cleansed, et cetera. And let's say, okay, well, let's remove some of the controls around how the builder did it, and let's look at this through a broader, more critical lens, and let's see what happens now. And only when you do that do you start to see the negative impact. So this is everything from AI used in talent related decisions all the way through some of these like AI companion tools where people are like literally getting very emotionally attached
Yeah.
to some of these assistants, and they're basically just making themselves more susceptible to manipulation, whether it's, deliberate or not. And
Yeah.
so I think it's hard. I know, I get that it's hard for the average person to, think about all of these things, but I don't know. In some ways, I'm cautiously optimistic that some of these challenges will get resolved over time, and we'll figure out better ways to evaluate some of these models and put some controls in place before they see the light of day and start to get a significant adoption. I'm not holding out hope around legislation, but that's also why the delays in a lot of legislation or the inconsistency in policies and within legislation is why I just think we need to hold each other accountable.
Yeah.
And that trust factor is enormous, because that's, if things continue at this pace, without trust and without holding each other accountable, we're in trouble. I mean, it's like not having any controls over, I always pick on social media, right? Because everyone just jumped in without really thinking about
Yeah.
the consequences. And then we've been cleaning it up ever since.
Yeah. Social media is it's a toy that's been around. It's very powerful and feels like AI is sort of this new toy that people want to experiment with. One thing that I'm always curious about is sort of incentive structures, right? When you think about these LLM, these platform providers, it helps to understand like what are their incentives, because then you can kind of understand what you can trust, right? It's sort of like, working with a third party recruiter as an example. I talk a lot about this I do a weekly session with job seekers, and I try to help them understand what the incentive structures are between a third party recruiter versus an internal recruiter, and how that might impact and what they might see as far as behavior. And so maybe you can comment on some of the incentive structures for some of these LLM providers. Is one of their incentives just to take in as much data around an individual user as possible and sort of building that trust? What is their incentive structure, and what should the average user be aware of?
Well, I think, we're generally in a world where, consumerism and capitalism thrive, right? And so I think all businesses are looking to find ways to sort of monetize their wares. So um, I think that there's a lot that goes into how do you build a better solution, or how are you solving a real challenge. So hopefully people who are trustworthy are trying to solve actual business challenges. And if we're talking B2B, obviously you're going to get more bang for your buck with, deploying to, larger companies, or just building trust, whatever your target market is, and build that trust so that you become a system of insight. You become a platform that people can rely on, and that once you've got your footprint there, you start to expand that. You find other use cases, you add more functionality. So I think in that sense, it's just following a traditional, SaaS, and then, shrink wrap software before it, and other, sort of digital products, and trying to increase, adoption of that. And in the B2C space, I think it's just, I want to have this on as many devices as possible, and just use network effects to start to expand the exposure. But yeah, I think just like with software and social media especially, um, if you're not paying for things, but a lot of us are now paying for
Yeah.
AI, some AI capabilities, which you didn't really have to do with, there's no premium. You can buy business associated and marketing, products from, Facebook, LinkedIn has all kinds of premium subscriptions or whatever. But for the average person, you're not paying for it. It means, they're getting a lot of value from your data.
Yeah.
And so the more people rely on it, the more people interact with it. I mean, survey after survey is showing these incremental, adoption. We've already seen generative AI adoption outpace every prior, wave of technology. And now even within companies, supposedly at least, half the population is using, um, some type of AI
Yeah.
tool on almost a daily basis. Now, whether that's leading to actual, productivity or, how far they are from in a, on a maturity sense, that is a little less clear. But I do think more and more people are embracing it. They're seeing how it's, saving them time or whatever. And so they've got their hooks. They've got their hooks clearly into a lot of people. And now, as people come up with ideas, they're going to say, well, I would love to do that. What other access do I need? Right. So maybe you move. Like right now, I'm only paying for. Well, I pay for Gemini as part of my Google Workspace,
Yeah.
deployment, for example, and I have a bunch of custom GPTs in Chat GPTs, so I pay for the Pro or the Plus version of that. But if I find a particular use case where, Perplexity, I want to build something in Perplexity, or I want to do something with Claude or whatever, and all of a sudden there's another $20 a month. There's another $20 a
Yeah.
month. And you start increment, and then maybe there's something that I want to build, for a client or in partnership with some other people. Well, now I need the controls. I need almost like an enterprise or, SMB license, right? And now we're talking about going from $20 a month to $200 a month or whatever. So I think as people start to adopt and find more use cases, they're going to start to say, oh, what if I also did this? What if I also did this? So within, everyone's got, different budgets and appetite for that type of growth trajectory. But I do think there's a lot of incentive for people for these big platform foundational, frontier model kind of vendors to get their hooks into, more and more people and in emerging markets as well, and not just, the more mature
Yeah.
markets around the globe. I think just like in Africa, where they sort of leapfrogged telecommunications by just all of a sudden doing, um, commerce over mobile devices, they leapfrogged having, laptops, desktops, or whatever. There's opportunities on that continent and other emerging markets for people to just jump right in. Now anybody with a mobile phone has AI in their pocket, and yeah, it's the growth opportunities are tremendous. So it's
Yeah.
definitely hard to ignore. But where I separate, the positive influences from not so positive is holding people accountable for all of these sort of checks that I typically talk about, which is everything around, human centricity. Are we doing things that are fair to all populations? And then on the responsible AI side, have we gone through all of these different dimensions within responsible AI as a builder of these products, such that we're going out there and we're doing the right things? I mean, already we've seen the foundation of these frontier models get criticized relentlessly for the way that, one person ignored copyright law and ingested, all of, New York Times, for example. Another one, grabbed all this, photo information, or, scraped, YouTube or whatever it is, right? There's all these
Yeah.
people like trying to get a jump start on having more reliable, models and ingesting more data. So I think people are doing some not so great things from a societal perspective in their efforts to get the right sort of market, positioning and adoption. Um, but none of the, nobody's perfect. There was someone who posted a really nice Substack the other day, just evaluating the level of unscrupulous sort of activities that have been taking place across different foundation models. And it was really just a ranking of, not good to terrible. I mean, nobody was great. Nobody's
Yeah.
perfect. But, we probably said the same thing about, Facebook when Meta was called Facebook and when Google first started. And, I think that was Google's motto, wasn't it? Like, do no evil or something.
Yeah. Do no evil.
But yeah, but I think, going back to what we talked about before in terms of data, I mean, people need to understand that, yeah, if you're using some of these tools for free, it's probably because they're getting value from the data that you're putting into it. And if you can opt out, great. But a lot of these systems by default for the free versions, I don't think you have that opportunity. And even when you do create something in a private instance, you've got to check your settings, carefully to make sure it's not, using um, that data inadvertently, because there are
Yeah.
multiple. Some of them have multiple, check boxes, and deep into the advanced settings where you've got to, check that.
Bob, so I want to shift gears here a little bit and talk a little bit about what we talked about from the very beginning, which was this idea of transferable skills and what are the new skills that the market is going to value as we start moving forward here. I think what I've seen as a recruiter is the market historically has valued specialization, right? And I think it's moving towards more generalization now, especially with AI enabling folks to be much more productive and capable. And the classic example that I give is, a product manager that can now, with the help of AI and AI tools, a product manager can now do design. A product manager can now stand up an MVP with cursor and vibe coding, right? And whereas before they would have to rely upon an engineer or a designer, and yeah, maybe the product manager is not getting to 95 or 99%, but they can get it to 80%, 85, maybe even 90%. And so what do you think is going to what are the trends that you're seeing with respect to what the market is valuing in terms of skills, and how can I, as a job seeker, as somebody that is concerned about the longevity of my career, how can I start to position myself to be where that puck is going?
Yeah, I mean, this is an enormous topic that I think everyone needs to think about, because even the jobs that we thought were safe, 2 years ago, we've started to realize those jobs actually aren't safe at all. Whether that's software engineering, or knowledge management, or management consulting, where you're basically paid the big bucks for your expertise and experience.
Yeah.
I think of I don't know if this is the best analogy, but for anyone who's a Matrix, fan, where Neo just needs a new set of skills, and they literally just upload it
Yeah.
to his brain, and instantly he's got those skills. I wouldn't say it's AI is quite that efficient and
Not yet.
instantaneous, but sort of outlines the fact that there's certain skills that AI is good at, and getting better at, analyzing large volumes of information, being able to quickly generate summaries and outlines. So there's a lot of professions that have a lot of disruption coming, if it's not already. Market research, I spent some time as a market researcher in the space a couple of years ago, and I did some market research work at IBM as well. Like, this gets into junior roles, so your early career talent. Like, some of it's like, well, if AI can be like the ultimate intern and junior employee, like, what's the lifespan of some of those junior roles in a lot of places? I think one of the surprising things for a lot of people was there's a big difference between automation and AI, and what AI is capable of. Automation, basically writing, scripts for routine, tasks that were maybe considered more administrative, and everyone has some of that on their plate, but some folks have more of that, or that is their primary role. And so we thought, 8-10 years ago, those are the jobs that were in trouble. And now with AI, not just predictive AI, which has also been around for a while, but generative AI and its ability to generate new content, to do a lot of the not necessarily trivial or consistent work. It's able to take on a lot of the knowledge work and be that sort of thought
Yeah.
partner. And so I agree with you, Eric. Like, the skills that I think we've seen, even from like World Economic Forum and others who have published research on this. I mean, this goes back a couple of years, but if you look at like the top in-demand skills listed in World Economic Forum for like 2030, none of them are technical, right? The most technical one on the top 5 list or top 10 list is AI literacy, right? You've got to know how to work with with AI, which is generally, digital skills, even if you're interacting with it through voice. But how do you, sort of augment your own, skills and abilities with AI so that you can basically be the best version of yourself and so that you can achieve all the potential that you could achieve. So the big skills, I think, are in how you employ AI in various modalities to help you with everything, solve problems, use your critical thinking, your creativity, your curiosity, your empathy. So you still, if you still want to be, a leader in an organization, you still have to have all of those innately human traits without getting into a debate about whether some of these AI tools can exhibit empathy in a companion way or other ways. I think that you've just got to think about having a continuous learning mindset so that you're always growing. Agility is huge. So you've basically got to be able to sort of roll with the ebbs and flows of some of the technology. Some of these projects may not go well and they'll die on the vine, but others are going to succeed, and it's going to disrupt what some of these, how you go to market. It's going to disrupt how you build a marketing campaign, how you analyze data. And so I think communication and storytelling are still going to be huge. The ability to work with data, because it's going to be a while before AI does everything, but if it can at least help you sort of summarize what it thinks are the key insights, you can use that. But I would still say, you need to do proper evaluations to make sure that the AI didn't miss anything, or it didn't have a particular sort of bias, and it understood all the context of the scenario. But I think management consulting is in a really interesting spot right now because they're charging the biggest companies in the world a lot of money, and they have to start asking themselves, could I box this up into an AI, a co-pilot of our own? I mean, even McKinsey just came out with Ask McKinsey, like they have their own
Yeah.
conversational AI now, and there's a lot in the talent space as well. There's a bunch of sort of big platforms. I mean, Josh Bersin has Galileo, and there's a bunch of different co-pilots, and now all the vendors have their own co-pilots and assistants and platforms and stuff too. So I think you've really got to focus on those innately human skills, empathy, curiosity, problem solving. So I think any time you're in an environment where you're starting to see that adoption take off within, official, formal adoption within an organization, you've got to be, I don't like to use the cliche, your AI is not going to replace you. Someone who uses AI is going to replace you. That is true to an extent. I just think that people need to, as you're putting it, like skate to where the puck is going. And that means thinking about how to elevate your own capabilities and augment your own capability, your skills, your judgment with, a well-trained and secure AI tool would be to your advantage, and start doing that now. Because I just like to tell people to envision that your whole department doesn't go away, but you probably only need a couple human beings to provide oversight over these agents and some of the AI. So if you're on a team of 10, try to be the person who works well with AI and tries to figure out how that can augment a smaller team. So try to move if you like the path that you're on, then try to be one of the top in the top quartile, or top fifth of whatever that discipline is, or start and you can use AI for this, but start thinking about based on all of my existing experiences and my existing skills, what are some alternative paths that I could consider where those transferable skills could be used. So I would definitely take a skills inventory, and then compare that to what the outlook looks like for some of these skills, and then say, well, how do I fill this gap, and how do I show future employers that I am one of these people who is an optimist when it comes to AI, and recognize that if I can find the best way for it to complement my own skills and abilities wherever I have those gaps, then I'm going to be the most effective employee that I can be, and contribute a lot of value to the organization.
Yeah. Yeah. Bob, my last question has to do with sort of what is next and how people can sort of position themselves, because a lot of folks right now are looking at transitions they're looking for their next position. How can they differentiate themselves? And especially in light of in light of there's just an abundance of talent out there competing for, you know, far fewer positions. And so,
Yeah.
how can I compete with that, right? And especially for like some of these folks that are just earlier in their career, maybe
Yeah.
just getting started, where maybe they don't even have a chance to be replaced. They're already being replaced from the outset by this technology because they're new in their career. Like, what are your thoughts on how they should navigate this?
Yeah, I mean, such an important question. And just because I'm late in my career doesn't mean I don't think about this. I think about it for my daughter who's going to be applying to college soon and
Yeah.
is under similar circumstances. Obviously, colleges admit more than one person to fill one role, but still, you've got, you could get straight A's and perfect standardized test scores, do a bunch of extracurriculars or whatever, and the school will still be like, so what? I got 2,000 people just like you, right? So what are you going to do to stand out? What makes me sort of differentiating? And so for applying to college, it's about how you what's your narrative, right? How do you tell a unique story?
Yeah.
Let's learn more about you. And so I think some of that applies in a talent context as you're trying to navigate the job market and think about how do I stand out. And I do think part of this is my own bias against resumes. So I'll just say that up front. But the problem now is so many resumes. I mean, you alluded to this, Eric. So many resumes look exactly the same. They look like too polished because AI wrote the
Yeah.
resume. Well, AI wrote the resume, but AI might have also written the job description. And now those two things are going to be matched by a third, AI. So it's all going to look very sort of, homogenized. It's going to look like you have a lot of, pretty qualified candidates. So I don't envy, recruiters these days trying to, go through all of this, not just the volume, but the homogeneity of a lot of the applications. And so I do think there's got to be ways for you to stand out. I'm bullish on AI interview tools because I think it gives all candidates an opportunity to, go and add some dimension to that piece of paper, physically or digitally. But that resume is very two dimensional. It's intended to
Yeah.
be a marketing document, right? It's to get to the next, step. And so if that first step, everyone's basically taking that step forward and is almost in the same spot, I do think, some of these tools, if the employers make them available, is an opportunity. I would not be discouraged by the fact that, you're not talking to a human. You probably weren't going to form a real relationship with that human who's doing their resume, screening anyway. Not to mention that, let's not forget, humans have bias as well. And
Yeah.
so I just think those kinds of tools give people an opportunity. Now, I realize from a candidate perspective, it's not necessarily in their hands whether companies they apply to have that, um, uh, that capability as part of the application process. But I do think once your application is submitted, whatever form that takes, candidates need to start thinking of ways of how do I write a more compelling cover letter, how the interview preparation, even for that initial interview. And in the candidate's mind, it's an initial interview. From the talent acquisition team, it's probably just called a recruiter phone screen. So they don't even call that the first interview. But nonetheless, I mean, everyone needs to put each other's perspectives into context as far as how do I describe myself in the context of some of those transferable skills that I mentioned earlier. Like, how do I show them that I am a sponge and I can't wait to
Yeah.
learn all these different things that you guys are working on? Show that you've done your research about the company, show that you've had some ideas. I mean, if they're tech savvy at all and embracing modern technology, then show how you've experimented with AI to make yourself even more competitive
Yeah.
in this market, because the AI literacy alone is going to help you stand out, at least for the short term. At some point, in a year or two, that'll get more saturated. But for right now, if you can show how you've helped yourself, you've upskilled yourself, you're consistently learning, you've already thought about how you would apply some of these capabilities within the target organization. I think those things can go a long way to standing out. And then, of course, make sure you're networking, make sure you're doing your research, make sure you're getting perspective of what it's like to be inside an organization, because when every candidate's just going through the basic steps, it's going that extra mile. I think that's going to help you stand out, and that's what they're looking for. They're looking for somebody who's uniquely qualified, not just on paper, but has really exhibited this sort of this go-getter kind of attitude, that you're ambitious, you're learning, but also exhibiting some humility, right? You still have a lot to learn. You can't go in there thinking that you're going to be schooling everybody when you get there, because that is going to do the opposite. That's going to show a certain level of arrogance instead of humility. But I just think that, as you embrace all of this uncertainty and you embrace some of these tools, use it to your advantage, both to put your best foot forward, but to also show these target companies that that you're thinking ahead. You're already thinking about um, work that you could do to provide more value to the organization, whether that's cost savings and avoidance, or new growth opportunities, and also that you have the basics of responsible and human centric AI, right? So you're not just going to go in there and start breaking things. That you're going in there and you're thinking about moving everybody forward in a responsible way, and that you're already going to be in a position to mitigate risk to the organization rather than inject more. So you've got to show that you can sort of help them play defense when it comes to risk mitigation and things like that. But also you're prepared to play offense as well, to say, I've got ideas, I can mentor others, I can lead by example, all of these, positive things that are more, I would put in the offense, category.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the points that you make is that there's a lot of folks out there that are really turned off by being interviewed by an AI, and I think the folks that sort of don't embrace that are missing out on an opportunity to send signal to the company. These AI technologies allow companies and recruiters to listen better, I think, if they're implemented properly. So anyway, I think there's a lot to explore there as well, Bob. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, we have to wrap up.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate your time. For the folks that are out there listening, there's a lot to unpack here that Bob has shared, and I think there's a lot that I'm learning as far as AI responsibility and being AI literate. That I think a lot of people they think they want to move. There's a lot of folks that are just turned off by AI, or they ignoring it, but there's a portion of folks that are just embracing it. And a portion of those folks are just moving very quickly and just apt to break stuff and experiment. But I think what you're advocating, Bob, is taking a measured, thoughtful approach that would benefit not only yourself but also the organizations that you're working with. And so I really appreciate some of the insights that you're sharing with us here today. How can folks learn more about AI responsibility and sort of how can they connect with you? And are there any other resources that you might suggest for the group?
Yeah, well, thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me. This was great. And yeah, we could probably talk for another hour about some of those topics. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to chat with folks and try to help you out. Whether you're a candidate or an individual within an organization, just trying to get your arms around literacy and AI readiness. I actually have an assessment that I could share to try to gauge that. And then I've got resources on my website and on my Substack. I'll be putting out a lot more content about these subjects. So yeah, you can follow me on Substack or LinkedIn. Those are probably the two best areas. Yeah, I mean, I would say, I guess one final thought, Eric, which is the job market is brutal. But think about it this way: if you've ever had an entrepreneurial bug, the quicker you learn AI, the quicker you might realize that maybe you can control your own destiny completely and be an entrepreneur and build something yourself. Because I've been through some of these AI boot camps, and I cannot believe some of the success that some people have, non-technical people, just learning how to do this and helping small businesses or others with some of these projects. Um, there's sometimes sensitivity to that, I suppose, as the market gets more saturated. But just like I tell my daughter, and people still aren't even in college yet, there's a lot of opportunity that will come if you build the right things responsibly, and get it out in the market that solves a real problem, because you will already be a step ahead of all these people that are just trying to have just strike while the iron's hot, and they're throwing a lot of sort of snake oil out there. So never discount your own ability and your own potential to, build something on your own, because the job market is absolutely, brutal.
Yeah. Bob, thank you for your time today. Those links to your LinkedIn profile and to your Substack, we'll put those in the show notes as well. We have that.
Perfect.
So appreciate it and look forward to do this again at some point in the future.
Sounds
Thank you,
good.
everyone.
Thanks, Eric.